So in my last video, I swatched all of the new colours that I bought from Roman Szmal's Aquarius line of watercolours. And I said in that video that I would do a comparison between those new colours and all of the other existing colours that I already own. However, when I started planning out that video, I thought I would swatch everything out again so we could go through everything in depth. And then I realised that that would be too many colours. This is only a very small proportion of the colours that I thought I would compare. Plus I have all of these cards. So I thought instead, whenever I get a new watercolour, I swatch it out on a little piece of 100% cotton watercolour paper like this. And I thought instead we could just look by colour family at all of the colours and in turn by turn, and that way we will get a really good overview in a very, very short amount of time. I am so excited to go through and just spend a little bit of time just looking at colours and seeing which ones have which properties to help you decide which ones you like, which ones you need, and exactly what makes these colours unique. So let's get into it. I will start out with the one colour that I could not find a good comparison for within my existing collection, and that is this Aquarius Violet. As you can see, this colour is just such a beautiful deep plum shade. In fact, I think during development it was called plum for some time, but it really has this lovely granulation from the ultramarine blue that's part of the mix, and then this like very muted red undertone in the background, and it is so stunning, and it simply does not compare to any other colour that I have in my collection right now. So if you're looking for a really, really unique colour, as far as I know, then this might be it. So the first new colour I swatched in that video was this colour, Nickel Tungsten Yellow, and its pigment number is PY189. And my immediate thought when it came to thinking of comparisons for this one would be to compare it to Nickel Titanate Yellow. I have a video all about mixing with Nickel Titanate Yellow, so you should check that out if you're interested. This is a beautiful pastel lemon yellow, and next to the Nickel Titanate Yellow you can see that the Nickel Tungsten Yellow is much warmer, and it also appears to be more granulating, which I think is really, really beautiful. You can really see how it settles into the texture of the paper, and that is very, very unique to this paint. Another comparison that made sense to me as this sort of like pastel, lighter toned yellow was to compare it to Turner's Yellow from Schminke. This is PY216. But this is definitely a much warmer version of this. It sort of sits almost perfectly in between these two colours, as if you just mix the two, you would get this pigment. An unexpected comparison that I also was able to make when I was looking through my swatch cards was it does seem to have quite a similar sort of value range to this pure yellow from Schminke, which is a PY154 benzimidazolone yellow. But it's obviously a lot less saturated and has this beautiful granulation. I think this pigment is a really, really wonderful find. I'm so happy that I picked this one up. While we're still in the yellow mood, I'll talk to you about this Gamboge Hue. This is also a new pigment that I haven't seen in any other brands, and it certainly is a really, really gorgeous, sort of glowing warm yellow. I'm not usually that into warm yellows, but I picked this one up because I thought it would be a good comparison to my existing paint that I had called Isolindolinen Yellow Deep, PY110, which is a much more standard pigment. As you can see, I could not have been more wrong. The Isolindolinen Yellow Deep genuinely looks like an orange next to this colour. Maybe it doesn't come across quite so well on camera, but this is definitely a warm yellow, and this is definitely what I would describe as a yellow-orange. And in the wash here, you can really see that the Gamboge Hue has this glowing yellow undertone to it, whereas the PY110 just kind of washes out to sort of a peachy tone with no particular saturation in the wash. So that was a really interesting comparison to make. I actually feel like a closer comparison would be somewhere between a cadmium yellow deep, though this is a opaque colour and also contains this heavy metals that people want to avoid sometimes, and it still doesn't have this glowing nature in the wash. And that could come from something like a Hansa yellow medium, though this colour is a lot cooler. I'd say that this like the glowing nature of this paint is actually what most people would liken to a nickel azo yellow, though it's certainly much brighter and more saturated than my nickel azo yellow from Roman Szmal, as much as I really love this colour for creating very, very nice earthy and natural greens. So hopefully this helps you understand exactly where the Gamboge Hue sits within this colour spectrum. I wish I had a Hansa Yellow Deep to compare it against, because maybe it would be a good comparison to that. But I have been stunned by this colour and how versatile it seems, and how the change in the tone of the colour from sort of the more mass tone to the wash is just such a nice transition, with this like really sunflower yellow orange at the top and then this glowing yellow in the lighter tones. One other colour that was new to me but not new in general is this Chromium Oxide green, which is a beautiful blue toned granulating green. I am so happy that I picked this one up. I think it will be so interesting to do some mixes with this. Let me know if you've used this colour before, if there's any mixes you're interested in seeing. And the best comparisons that I could find for this sort of earthy green colour are naturally Green Earth, which is a very transparent, much lighter colour, and this Cobalt Green Deep, which is, while it is granulating, maybe a little more granulating, and also quite muted, a lot more blue toned than the Chromium Oxide Green. So I think this paint really fills a gap that was genuinely there in my existing palette. Next up is a colour that has been the talk of the town, and in a little way, because this Perylene Red Deep is a very interesting version of the pigment that's usually used for Perylene Maroon, PR179. And I was very intrigued by this because I already own a version of Perylene Maroon by Roman Szmal, PR179. And you can see that this version seems maybe more transparent and a little bit more earthy, more muted than this version, and also a little bit warmer. And I saw somebody else suggest that maybe this paint was developed as a replacement for PR209 quinacridone maroon, which is being discontinued, unfortunately. And here is the Roman Szmal's quinacridone maroon. As you can see, it is once again way warmer in tone, more orangey. And also kind of unrelated, but I have never really gotten along with this formulation from Roman Szmal for this pigment. I always find it very hard to get a flat wash out of, even when you have decent water control and use like nice paper. However, this also corresponds to, I also have quinacridone maroon from Schminke, and you can see again, this colour isn't exactly like that, though I guess maybe it would perform similarly in mixes. So if you were looking to replace the PR 206, did I say 209? I mean 206, that's being discontinued now, then maybe this would be something worth trying. It certainly seems to lay down flatter than the alternative version. I also have a Perylene Maroon by Schminke, which is generally my preferred version. It's a little cooler toned, but I think it stays more vibrant when it's dry. It's also a little bit deeper, which I quite like. Another colour that I thought we could compare to this Perylene Red Deep is Cadmium Red Deep, and you can see why I would sort of suggest that, although this colour is incredibly transparent and this colour is very opaque, but it does paint out very, very smoothly. I actually really like this colour, though I don't use it that much. The other thing I noticed about this Perylene Red Deep, you might be able to see if I give you a close-up, is it does seem to have some texture, some sort of sense of flocculation or granulation within the paint. I'm not sure if this was just my pan, so you'll have to let me know if you've tried this colour and you've seen a similar pattern, but I think it's really interesting either way. In the same vein of colours that I have bought that are a red-brown shade, one of the colours that I bought was this Venetian Red. This is not a new pigment at all, it's a very, very traditional pigment, but I didn't own a version, and this version from Roman Szmal I fell in love with immediately, as you can tell in that swatching video. But I did want to do some comparisons. So for example, I wanted to compare it to the Indian Red, which you can very clearly see is nothing like this because it's much deeper, much more opaque, and also much warmer, much more reddish. And I also wondered if it might have been more similar in that case to PR290, which is Ginger Red, which is another unique pigment to Roman Szmal. I would say that they have a lot more similarities, but obviously this is very much an orange and this is definitely a brownish red. The most similar hue that I've found is this transparent brown, and even then you can see that this pigment has a very different hue. You know, you could probably get away in a wash, you probably wouldn't be able to tell. But also this paint is, as it says in the name, really transparent, so it wouldn't necessarily perform the same in mixes as the Venetian Red will. This is another colour which I'm very interested in testing out some mixes with as we go forwards. To take things in a little bit more of a vibrant direction, I also bought this quinacridone fuchsia as to function as my quinacridone magenta, because I do not own a quinacridone magenta and I find it hard to persuade myself to, because I just really am not drawn to those magenta colours, though I know they perform beautifully in mixes. And the only comparison I have for this is the quinacridone Violet by Roman Szmal, and while they do look quite similar when they're dry, this is definitely quite a lot bluer. You can really see it in the lighter tones, and I know for a fact from testing out mixes, not with these but with other purple shades, that the tone can really show itself in mixes with complementary colours specifically. So I'm very excited to test out and see what the difference is between these two. Going back into the new pigments now. This is not a new pigment, it's a PBR7, which is a very standard pigment, but this is a new formulation of it from Roman Szmal, and it's called Natural Umber Reddish. As you can see, it's a wonderful warm brown with this really interesting granulation where it settles into the paper. I am not disappointed by this colour at all. It's exactly what I was hoping it would be, and I'm very, very happy to have it. When I watched a video of somebody else doing a comparison of these paints, they compared it to the transparent Oxide brown, which is one of my favourite browns that I already had. And as you can see, they are quite similar, especially in the mass tone, but this colour is perhaps even warmer than the Natural Umber Reddish, and the granulation definitely doesn't sit in the same way. I think this is also a little bit less saturated in terms of it being a more greyish muted tone, especially in the wash. And the only other PBR7 I have is this Cypress Raw Umber Deep, which has some similar qualities to this, but you can definitely tell that it's a lot cooler of a brown. And also I found that this colour is so beautiful to re-wet, whereas the raw umber can be a little bit difficult at times. With this new release for 2023, Roman Szmal released a confusion of red colours, so many red colours to choose from, and even 3 of them were Perylene colours, so I showed you the Perylene Dark Red, and here is the Perylene Scarlet. They also released a Perylene Vermilion, which I did not buy, but I have seen from other people's swatches that it's very similar to this, but maybe a little bit more on the pink side, so if you prefer a cooler red, then maybe give that a go. But I have some comparisons. For example, I wanted to compare it to the Perylene Red. You can definitely see that it's much more vermilion of a hue, a lot more orangey than the Perylene Red, though they're both beautiful to work with. I also think that the Perylene Scarlet is maybe a little bit more transparent. Perylene Red is not opaque in the same way that a cadmium red is, but it is a little bit more on the opaque side. And maybe the saturation of the Aquarius Red PR214 would match the saturation level a little bit better, but like I say, this is also a lot cooler of red, a lot more pinkish. My favourite red from Roman Szmal up to this point was Quinacridone Scarlet, which doesn't even have a pigment number, and I was hoping that this would be similar to this. And as you can see, they are actually quite close in the sense that they're both much more on the warmer side of the spectrum, but I think that Quinacridone Scarlet is both a little warmer and less saturated than the Perylene Scarlet. I think that these two probably do perform differently in mixes, and I am really loving this Perylene Scarlet as sort of like a more true red that's still on the warm side. And just for the comparison for pigments that you might know and be familiar with already, this is Pyrrole Scarlet from Roman Szmal. As you can see, this Perylene Scarlet is definitely redder and less orange than the Pyrrole Scarlet, which is really more of a true sort of vermilion colour. So I think that this colour fills a certain niche within the red spectrum. Speaking of reds, one of the real hits from this release has been the Quinacridone Warm Scarlet. And a lot of people picked up on immediately that this looks quite similar to the Quinacridone Cherry Red from Roman Szmal, their PR209 Quinacridone Coral, which is a very popular pigment, really widely beloved. and I already have the quinacridone cherry red. And when you put them side by side, you could say that they are very, very similar. I think if you have one, you do not need the other one, but the quinacridone cherry red is definitely more on the pink side. Maybe it would mix more vibrant violets than oranges, and maybe the quinacridone Warm Scarlet would then mix a little bit more easily, happily with yellows to get you that side of the spectrum. But they are both beautiful and they are incredibly similar. Like, if you had one or the other, you might not be able to tell the difference. Another comparison I have, so this is PR207, which is just quinacridone red pigment. I have this pigment from Schmincke, and as you can see, they're also incredibly similar. I think that the Schmincke one is less saturated. I'm not so much in love with this paint here, to be honest. It's a wonderful quality, but I just don't know if the colour calls me quite so much. And it's definitely also a little bit on the cooler side, a little bit more blue, but it's really, you can only tell when you put them right side by side. In an ideal world, I think what I want is a quinacridone version of this Rose Doré from Winsor & Newton. You can see how it's a much lower tinting strength colour, and it's also a mixture of PV19 and PY97, I believe. But you can see how it maintains this lovely coral colour even in a wash, and that's what I'm really missing from this sort of range of coral colours, I think. Just something maybe a little bit more yellow leaning, but maybe I have to mix my own. Another of the existing paints that I bought is this olive green light, which has an amazing value range. It looks a little bit less green on camera than it does in real life. This paint is made up of several pigments, one of which is PY150 Nickel Azo Yellow, and you can really see that in the wash when you get this glowing tone coming through. But it has an amazing value range from really deep to really bright tones in a wash. I think this is a really, really nice colour. And I also found it to be rather unique. I know that Roman Szmal sells an olive green deep. I don't have that to compare, but I can compare it to a green gold that people might be more familiar with. This is PY129. Roman Szmal calls it deep green gold because they also have another green gold that's actually a mixture of pigments. But as you can see, the value range on this is a lot wider, and also it's just a lot more on the green side than the deep green gold, which is more yellow. And another mixed colour that Roman Szmal sells, another unique mixture, is this autumn green. Possibly my favourite green that they sell, but it's definitely, because it contains cobalt green, it's a lot more on the true green side than this olive green light. Either way, I think that this olive green light is truly very unique, and I'm very excited to have purchased it. Another colour that might seem standard, but one that I have not purchased yet in any brand, is Indigo. And I bought this because I have a friend who's absolutely obsessed with this colour. I go through so much of it, and I just had to try it out for myself. Roman Szmal's Indigo is a mixture between PV60 Indanthrone Blue and a black pigment. And so I was very curious to compare against my other PV60s and adjacent colours. One of the colours I wanted to compare it against was the Prussian blue from Roman Szmal. I did a whole video on this recently and why it's my new favourite blue, so maybe I'm a little biased. Obviously it's a lot more on the green side and more saturated than the Indigo, but I think it has a very similar value range actually, maybe even going a little deeper in the mass tone. To compare just against Roman Szmal's Indanthrone Blue PV60, you can see that they use this pigment, and then when you add a little bit more black to it, it turns into this more moody, muted colour, which I love. However, I'm not the biggest fan of Roman Szmal's Indanthrone Blue. I think it's a nice paint, don't get me wrong, but I much prefer the formulation from Schmincke's Delft Blue for my Indanthrone Blue. As you can see, this one has like a much wider value range. It gets super, super deep, and it almost looks like velvet on the paper. I'd recommend this for anyone looking to try an Indanthrone Blue. If you've been a little bit disappointed by the drying shift and the lack of saturation in other brands, try this Schmincke Delft Blue, just trust me. Another one of the new releases that has really been very popular as far as I can see is this Strontium Violet PV 62. This is a pigment that was only available previously from Lucas and Schmincke as their Cobalt Violet hues, or Cobalt Violet. And I was on the fence about whether I would purchase this one because when I tried the Schmincke one, I was really not that impressed with the granulation and with the formula. It just felt a little gummy to me and I wasn't sure about the hue. But looking at this now, I can tell you that this paint is a joy to use. It's easy to re-wet and I think that the granulation texture is just perfect. This is a comparison to the Schmincke Cobalt Violet hue, same pigment, but as you can see, I think that this one is a little bit warmer, a little bit more of a red tone to it. And also it has this weird sort of texture in the mass tone. I know that I had a little bit of a binder issue with mine. And also the granulation is very, very strong and very, very clumpy. I don't know. I'm not the biggest fan of this one, but I'm sure that it's a little bit more of a delicate, warmer formulation. Maybe some people are really, really in love with that, and that's great. To compare this against, for hue, against a colour that you might be more familiar with, here it is against the Dioxazine Violet. You can see that it's certainly a bit lighter and bluer than Dioxazine Violet. And the other colour that I thought I could possibly compare it to is this Ultramarine Violet, which I was kind of hoping it would replace, because Ultramarine Violet is a little bit of a low tinting strength colour. It's a little bit hard to re-wet. As you can see, the Strontium Violet is a little bit more blue toned than the Ultramarine Violet, and the granulation is a little bit stronger, I would say, in the Strontium Violet. But I think that these two colours are both so beautiful, and you could pick one depending on your preferences. I think they are the same price, basically. So I think they're very complementary, I think. I'm not sure, I'll have to see which one I choose to keep. So these were the yellow earth tones that I bought to go with my collection from Roman Szmal this time around. These were both existing colours in their range, and I bought this gold ochre. So it's a really, really nice, super warm yellow earth tone, and this goethite, which is a little bit more muted and has this fantastic deep brown granulation. I think this is just such an interesting colour. You could easily paint like a leopard or something with this. It would be really, really beautiful. But in terms of comparison, I think that I would compare the gold ochre in tone to maybe something like a less saturated quinacridone gold. I think that would be a reasonable comparison. I might even compare it to a slightly more yellow-toned Naples Yellow Deep PBR24, except for the fact that this Naples Yellow Deep is a lot more granulating than the gold ochre, which is only moderately granulating, I would say. It doesn't have that much texture to it. The existing yellow earths that I had from Roman Szmal were their transparent gold ochre, which, as you can see, is a sort of lighter and yet more yellow version of the gold ochre. I think that these are very complementary yellow earths. I think maybe the gold ochre would be a better mixer just because it is stronger and easier to re-wet, whereas the transparent gold ochre really has this lovely light tones which I think are just so delicate and beautiful. And the only other yellow earth tone that I had before was this Blue Ridge Raw Sienna. And this is also a really, really nice yellow earth, though I was always a little bit on the fence because it does seem a bit more on the brown side. And when I look at them now, I could almost say that this goethite could be like a Blue Ridge Raw Sienna with some kind of very strongly granulating dark brown mixed in. I know it's not, but you can see what I mean. The undertone of the goethite is very similar to that of the Blue Ridge Raw Sienna, and then it's just like this really interesting granulation. I find the goethite granulation particularly interesting because you can't really see it in the pan at all when it's new. This is the goethite. It doesn't have a pigment number because it's just a earth pigment straight from some rocks, basically. But you can see now I've used it. You can see where the granulation comes from and where the sort of undertone has separated on the top. But when I first used this, you couldn't see that at all. It was really, really quite magical. So I hope that this video helped you understand a little bit better how these new colours relate to some of the old colours, and maybe if you had not yet decided which colours you were going to get, or if you were on the fence about maybe whether they were worth it or whether they were really different enough, then hopefully this video helped you out. Thank you so much for watching. You'll have to let me know in the comments below which colour is your favourite, if any of these really surprised you, if there are any other comparisons you would have liked to have seen, because I can totally let you know. Please do not forget to hit like and subscribe and leave a comment if you like the video. It helps me out so much. We are building such a nice community here and it brings me so much joy, and I hope it does to so many others too. And I will see you next weekend for another video, and hopefully I will post some shorts of swatching some fun colours in between, just for some nice relaxing content on the weekdays. Check out my community page for the new video schedule. But thanks for watching, and I will see you then. Bye!